Hi, Jennifer. Could you please start by by introducing yourself, telling us what is your area of expertise, your title, spelling out your name, and what would you like us to call you?
Okay, my name is Jennifer Pancorbo. Feel free to call me Jennifer. It spells Jennifer Pancorbo. I am the Director of Industry Programs and Research at North Carolina State University's Biomanufacturing Training and Education Center. I have been here for about almost 12 years now. Before that, I worked for a vaccine development company doing viral vector vaccines. I came to BTech to lead their vaccine training program, and I currently do research in mRNA vaccine production and purification. I am also head of the professional development training program, and I lead our small bioprocess analytical services group, which kind of helps develop processes and projects for third parties.
Wonderful. You sound like a good person to help us understand this. We were looking at this tweet recently that says the Biden administration won't accept 1 million doses of the monkeypox vaccine from Denmark because the FDA failed to do a timely inspection of the plant, even though the European Union authorities did inspect the plant and approve this product for its use in the European Union. So could you help us unpack this? Like, for the regular person who doesn't know what it takes for these vaccines to reach us when they're manufactured abroad, could you walk us through this process and the main challenges that the FDA looks for or faces when inspecting or trying to approve a product like this?
Yep, that is a really long question, so I'll do my best to sectionate the answer for you. But let's say initially that the regulatory processes for therapeutics is not harmonized around the world. What that means is that every country has their own path to approval of drugs. And vaccines are drugs, so they go under that umbrella. There are regulatory authorities throughout the world. WHO is one of those harmonizing organizations that has the jurisdiction to approve drugs for some nations, but those nations have gone to WHO and expressed their willingness to have that body authorize drugs for them. There are other organizations, for example, in Japan, in China, in the European Union, the United States we all have our own. And they may or may not agree on all the requirements for a drug to be acceptable to enter their jurisdiction. So a drug that is appropriate to enter the Japanese market may not be appropriate to enter the European market or to enter the Chinese market or our market. That's because of the lack of harmonization. Is something that we have been working on for a long time, but sovereign nations have their own different ideas of what requirements need to be met for the public to access a particular drug. And that is why there is this lack of harmonization among the regulatory authorities. Therefore, when we manufacture a new product and we want to reach a new market as manufacturers, then we're going to have to go to each individual organization that regulates that new market we want to reach. The European Union, the FDA for our country, the Japanese authorities, and so on and so forth. That is even true for when you do a clinical trial. If you want to do your clinical trial in a nation other than the United States, then you have to reach that regulatory authority overseas to make sure they approve you to introduce your drug for testing into their market. So that is to the part of your question about how come this drug has been approved by the European authority, but is not suitable to enter the United States market. And that's because we have our own method and system and path to determine that a drug is suitable for our market or not. And regulations vary depending on that authority. And so that's one thing. And the next thing is, what is the process that FDA follows then for a drug to be approved to our market in general, but when it's manufactured overseas in particular. So in general, the process is very similar for a drug to be manufactured here or not. The FDA is going to want to see all the data that you have collected over phase 1, phase 2, phase 3 clinical trials. They're going to review that. Once they deem that your application is acceptable, that your data is acceptable, then they're going to move forward with an inspection that will come to your facility. And that takes a while. There are only so many people working on FDA, and there are a lot of drugs that are moving up for approval, especially now, and specifically for vaccines nowadays. So usually you wait months for that process to move from reviewing your clinical data to getting that inspection. Once the inspection is approved and you get a date, then you get this nice letter that says the FDA will be on site on day 1, 2, or 3. It usually doesn't take just one day, especially for processes that are quite complex, as vaccine manufacturing is. So the members of the FDA will come to your facility and walk through, and they will sit down with the members of the team for a very long time. Like I said, it can be many days or a week, and start asking you questions about how did you do this? How did you do that? How are you managing this equipment? How are you managing this order? How are you planning to pack your drug? How are you planning to get your raw materials? I mean, they go in detail through all the steps and components that are necessary for manufacturing. And that takes some time. They gather a number of data out of that, and then they retreat to study that data and to understand, make sure that everything they saw is appropriate. If it is appropriate, then they issue their approval, and now you have FDA consent to manufacture and distribute that product that you seek approval for. It is no different for a drug that is being manufactured overseas, with the only exception that nowadays traveling is lower, right? There's a lot of issues even with how many cars you can rent, where you can rent a car. So for the FDA, they need to deploy their inspectors overseas. They need to book their time. They need to fly arrangements and all that stuff. And then they need to come back and review the data. And then issue their approval. So what I understand happened with the monkeypox vaccine was that this is not a novel vaccine, by the way. It's not a novel disease. We have had monkeypox existing, and we know about it for a number of years. We have studied it. The vaccine is based, actually, the 2 or 3 candidates that we have are based on a fairly old technology that we are fairly familiar with. This manufacturing organization has been doing it for a while, and it has been in our market for a while. What changed was that originally the manufacturing organization was subcontracting the final fill finish of the product to another organization, which is a very common thing, mostly because that particular operation is a world of its own. And we can talk for 30 minutes only about what it means to fill and finally market and label a drug in general. So because of that, many organizations tend to outsource that last step of the manufacturing process, and they focus on just the bulk manufacturing of the product. Then they send the bulk to the filling organization. They put it on vials or in syringes, and they are the ones that put it in boxes, label everything, and send it out. It requires an inspection of the product, many things. So, like I said, very commonly, that step is outsourced. But it turns out this manufacturing group that is doing the monkeypox vaccine decided that now they were going to have their own in-house manufacturing final fill finish organization. And as a new segment of their manufacturing process, it becomes a change in the process in which they were making the original vaccine. And as a change, and a significant change, the FDA is going to want to inspect that process again and make sure that everything complies and that everything is up to standard. And so that's what happened. They set up this new facility for final fill. The facility went out for inspection, and that inspection was scheduled to happen, I believe, in fall of this year. Of course, the monkeypox emergency came in like April, May. And now that vaccine that otherwise would have been easily sent to the United States because it was already approved before, now it had this hiccup that was changed. And as a significant change, it had to be reevaluated. And that's when we find ourselves now. As I understand, the FDA was able to move ahead the inspection process, which is actually a very kind and difficult thing for them to do. So that prop to them that they did that in the light of the emergency. But the Biden administration or any other group that wants to introduce product to the United States will not be able to do it until they get that nice stamp of approval that the FDA provides. And that's the process where we are in right now. In the process of they did the inspection, I believe late in June or early, it's been recent that they completed the inspection of this new final fill finish facility. And now they are analyzing the data because they get a lot of data as part of their observations and all that. They create a report. They send a report to the manufacturing organization. They send a report that they file at the FDA. And then they issue the letter that says, now you are approved to distribute. And we are in that impasse, as I understand, of waiting for that letter to be issued. It usually takes months, to be perfectly frank, to get that letter after the inspection happens. So if they manage to get it out within a few weeks after inspection, that would be actually a remarkable achievement for the FDA.
That was a terrific explanation of the entire process. Thank you for that. You just went over like 90% of the stuff that I was curious about. That's
all right. That is good. I'm glad.
So the hiccup here was, so the vaccine itself had already been FDA approved. The process that a lot of people are familiar with, the clinical trials, all that already happened. The issue here was they made a change to the manufacturing, one part of the manufacturing, and so the FDA has to go back and say, hey, we need to check your new factory to make sure it's still up to our standards.
Yeah, and there are some changes in the process that are minor. Let me give you an easy related example. So you are making burgers, and now you go from packaging them with paper to packaging them with plastic bags. You know, the burger hasn't really changed. Yeah, there's a couple of things you want to review about the paper and the plastic, making sure that it's not going to damage your burger. But the burger is the burger is the burger. So, but if now you tell me that instead of using wheat bread, you're going to be using potato-based bread, then that is a significant change to how you're making your burger. And I'm gonna wanna go and see where you're getting your potatoes from, and how you're preparing your potatoes, how you're cleaning your potatoes. I mean, because you're making a different bread. And that's kind of what happened with this vaccine. It is a significant change in the way they were doing it, because now they're going from supplier A that is packaging the product to supplier B. And Lord knows how supplier B, I mean, hopefully is absolutely outstanding. It usually is better than the original, but they have to prove it.
Right, because the concern would be if, especially in a country other than the US, they could make a change that would potentially, not necessarily likely, but could potentially make the vaccine somehow harmful to people.
Exactly. And there are many little nuances to a product like this, especially because they are injectables, right? They're going straight to your blood system, and they're therefore, that have the potential to cause a lot of adverse reactions and responses in the final recipient of the product. We have seen issues even with the kind of a stopper, like the rubber stopper that is put in a vial. How that stopper interacts with the liquid inside the vial may actually have detrimental consequences to the final user. And because of that number of potential interactions and dangers, for the final user, is that we take all these precautions in following a very thought of line of inspections and approvals and data reviews and all that, because the last thing you want is to get sicker because of the vaccine you receive, right?
Right. And then, so the other part of this that was interesting is, so like obviously you mentioned, there are, every country has its own regulatory agencies. And it looked like the European regulatory agency had gone into this new factory and said it's okay. What the FDA has said is we don't have reciprocity. We don't necessarily trust that the Europeans know what they're doing. Is that sort of what's happened here?
I wouldn't want to put it in those words specifically, but in a nutshell, yes. It goes back to hegemony, right? To the right of a country to make their decisions about what breaks our borders. I think at the root of all this harmonization issue is that. a country does have the right to make decisions about what comes through their borders. And we don't want the Europeans to tell us that this is good for us. We want to make our own decision about what is good for us. To tell you the truth, most of the time, the regulations of the European Union are a lot more stringent than the regulations for the FDA. So if something has passed their inspection, my guess would be that it will pass the FDA. Yet again, we are not going to just accept what the Europeans say. We want to go and see and make our own decision about it, which kind of, in a nutshell, goes to what you just said. We don't know if they know what they're talking about. We want to make sure we know what we're talking about, and whatever our fellow Americans receive is the thing that we want them to receive. And because of that, then yes, we're going to have a delay in the time between now and when we can actually get those 1 million or 800,000 doses that are sitting in some storage room somewhere. But, you know.
Right, and because the doses have already been made, presumably if the factory failed the inspection, they wouldn't be able to get the doses, but if it passed it, you can retroactively approve those doses?
Absolutely. If they can follow the process, there are very strict documentation practices in terms of how something is manufactured. So they could potentially look through that process, make sure that it was manufactured under the guidelines that have been approved, and retroactively said this meets the standards that we approve for, and then enable that product to come in. So yeah, that's a possibility. The other possibility is that you said, no, this doesn't meet the standard, we don't want it, in which case this organization from Denmark can continue to sell their product locally to the European market because they have been approved for that market.
Right. From your experience in the field, how common or rare is it for the FDA to do something like they've said they're doing for this vaccine and to accelerate the timeline for inspection? Say, well, we were going to inspect this in the fall, but now that we have this outbreak, we're already there. We're in Denmark. We're doing this.
It happens with that commonality. With how often do we get an emergency disease that requires them to move forward like that, which is not that common. Thank goodness, to be honest with you, we don't have these, emergency outbreaks happening often, and so we don't really often see a push in the schedule. But when we have a drug that has the potential to address a disease that is of potential emergency, then they move forward and they decide to, we cannot wait until fall to inspect these. People are dying now, so we need to go and inspect these, especially if there is a product like this that is already existing and it has the potential to really solve a lot of the issues that they are encountering. So that does happen, yeah. They have a platform to move that forward.
So claims that there was a delay here, it would actually maybe be the opposite. There was an acceleration here.
That's how I see it, because I am familiar with the environment, I guess. Yes, if you know that the vaccine is out there already made and you're expected to ship it and get it now, then not getting it now and getting it in 2 months is a delay. So I empathize with that just as well. But unfortunately, or fortunately, we do have a process to follow through. And that's what is slowing down us receiving this vaccine. It might be for the better.
Is there any process to waive that in an emergency, to say this, if the epidemic was even larger, to say, hey, this is bad enough that we're just going to go ahead and trust the Europeans and will give us these doses right now? Is that a mechanism that exists?
Not that I am aware of. I don't think I've ever heard that happened. What has happened is that vaccines that are approved, but were, let's say, put on hold, or like, for example, there are vaccines that are based on live viruses. And for monkeypox, we have one, I think it's called ACAM 2000, that is actually quite potent and is known to cause very adverse reactions, especially in people with certain compromised immune systems. And there are examples of that in influenza and in polio, where you go away. Polio is very common. Now we have the polio that there are 2 types of polio, one that you can swallow, one that you can inject. One is a live vaccine, the other one is not. The one that is live has a potential to revert to the wild type, versus the other one doesn't because it's an inactivated form of vaccine. If you are in a pandemic emergency and people are dying and you have had that potentially dangerous vaccine in the market, then you can revert back and say, in the light of this emergency, we are going to embrace this more dangerous vaccine now. Why? Because the danger of you dying of monkeypox is bigger than the danger of you dying because the vaccine reverted, for example, or because the vaccine has adverse effects. Maybe the adverse effects related to the vaccine are peanuts compared with the adverse event of you dying of monkeypox, So that has happened, that you may weigh the risks of a product compared with the risks of the disease. But going and saying, we are going to allow this product into our country because the Japanese approve it, I don't think I've ever seen that.
Gotcha. And then my last question, just kind of out of personal curiosity, and I don't know if this is something you would know, but because there are so many, I assume, drugs abroad that are manufactured abroad that we would import, are there FDA inspectors who just like live abroad and their job is to go around India and inspecting all the different manufacturers in India? Or are they all just based out of DC and flying out all over the place all the time?
Both happen, but yes, there are people who basically live their life in India or in China because they are always there approving or auditing facilities that are located in India, in China, or in adjacent areas that geographically make sense for them. So yes, we have actually trained members of the FDA. Now we're doing it online. They used to travel here to take the training. Now we are facilitating the training online because they have to do so much work abroad that is difficult for them to travel here, plus the risk of acquiring COVID-19 through their travels and that affecting their ability to perform their job is quite high. So the FDA and us have come to an agreement and negotiated and do new training modalities so that they can stay out there because that does exist. And of course, there is a number of FDA members that are actually located here in the United States, and their main bread and butter is to inspect facilities in the United States and or Canada or Mexico, so more local. But those even have now been deployed to other regions just because in the emergencies that we've been facing recently, that need has come.
Very interesting. All right, well, that's about all the questions I had. I'll toss it back over to you, Mauricio. These answers have been fantastic. Thank you so much for.
I'm glad.
Jennifer, this was extremely helpful. Do you think there's anything that we didn't ask you that it's important for our audiences or our public to know or to understand?
No, I think I covered everything when I did my initial introduction, and I kind of dismembered your question because I wanted to make sure that it is understood why we go through this process and the different segments and the different perspectives. But I think I covered that. So I leave it in your capable hands to present that to your audience.
Thank you so much. We'll let you know when the story comes out and do our best to share the links when available.
Yeah, I will appreciate if you can share that with me. I always love to see whatever it is that you have produced.
Okay, thank you so much.
My pleasure. Bye. Nice meeting you.